Hello everybody, this is going to be a podcast for the Urban Fieldwork unit. Now, as geographers, as geography students, you do have to do a couple of field trips throughout the year. So throughout your GCSE, you have to do one human fieldwork trip into the town or the city and one physical fieldwork trip. So physical is normally rivers, coasts, something natural like that. This video will focus on the Urban Fieldwork unit, of which you have either been taught or are going to be taught going forward. So ultimately there's a few key definitions coming your way in this video, so slightly longer than normal, but looking at keywords like hypotheses and then data and what we do with that data to basically formulate a perfect investigation, something that you will do for A-level in terms of a research project and then again at university, to be honest, regardless if you choose geography or not going forward. Okay, so in this topic, we have things called aims, hypotheses, and background information, and that's the first thing you have to do. You have to find out what it is you're going to find out. You can't go to the centre of Kyrenia or centre of London and think, right, once I'm here, now I've got to work out what I'm doing. You have to work that out first. So the first thing you do is work out what it is you're looking for and what kind of question you're trying to answer. Now, a hypothesis is a statement that can be proven either true or false. So, for example, in terms of coasts, erosion happens at this coastline. That is a statement that could be proven either true or false, and then you would go ahead and research that using different methods and techniques and equipment, and then you would find out basically if it's true or false, and then you would report that if it happened or it didn't. So once you do that, then collect your data. So once you work out exactly what you're doing, research the background, check the site, see if it's fair, see if it's safe, see if it's passed all the risk assessment. Then you collect your data. So you have methods that you do that with depending on the investigation. Obviously there's a risk assessment to this too, where you see if it is, as I say, safe. And then once you get your data, you'd come back to school, you'd present that in various forms like bar graphs and bar charts and other things like that. Then once you do that, you have data that you've now put into a visual form. You can then interpret that data before ultimately the final thing you would do is look at your graphs that you've made from the data that you collected and then come to your own conclusions and evaluations as to basically whether the hypothesis is true or false. Okay. Now, in terms of your aim specifically for the ESK score, your aim is to investigate the relationship between land use and environmental quality in Kyrenia. Okay, now there's different reasons, and you will write about these as to why Kyrenia is a sensible answer. If I ask you to go to Manchester, it's slightly more difficult to get to and back in the space of a few hours. So we chose a place close to school for you guys to study. Kyrenia makes the most sense. It's an urban area. It's close enough to school that you can do it. So the data we collect from there, or that you have collected already from there, can help you answer the question of whether there is a relationship between land use and environmental quality in the area. Now, that means it's manageable. That means it's achievable. And you have enough time to do this maybe once or even twice. So in terms of when you're asked in the exam, you might be, why did you choose the site that you chose? And you'll say, we chose Kyrenia because it's accessible, it's close, it's easy, it makes sense logistically. Now, also, we have to make sure that the area we choose has people in it and that it actually will work in terms of the research you're trying to find. So yeah, and Kyrenia does that, absolutely. Now, Kyrenia is an old town and it has had stages of development, so it is interesting to look at, and obviously there's different areas that are used for different things, so land use will be certainly interesting. Hopefully those of you that have done the field trip already have found that. So you do some primary data collection at some point where you go into the field, or as I say, maybe already have done, you go into the field and you collect data yourself. So this can be, I'll go through it in a minute, but this could be actual things that you found out, you've researched and you've recorded. That's primary data. Secondary data is data that you have used from someone else. So say, for example, at the school, I give you a book that has been written by somebody else who found that this many people passed through Kyrenia at this time. You could use that information, but it's secondary because someone else has done it. So the idea is that you kind of use a combination of both primary and secondary. Now, the hypotheses that you take from this title, there's three of them. Number one, the land use in Kyrenia changes with distance from the CBD. So ultimately, that is a statement that could be proven true or false. Does the land use Kyrenia change with distance from the CBD? That's a question. So we're not looking at questions here, we're looking at hypotheses. The land use of Kyrenia changes with distance from the CBD. So you would do different things to find out if that was true or false, record it, present it, analyse it. Second hypothesis is the environmental quality decreases or increases with distance from the CBD. So you'd have to find out if it does or not, and then check if your statement is true or false. And number 3, there is a relationship between distance from the CBD and the number of people/traffic. So again, various methods to record this and find out if it's true or false, present that, etc. So in terms of background information, we're looking at Kyrenia. It's important to look at, I know you maybe live here or live nearby or you've been there a few times. It's important to look at any relevant issues that are going on. That includes secondary data. So for your exam, you'll be in a better place if you look at the background of Kyrenia, the history, looking at maps. So look at maybe a local map of just Kyrenia, maybe look at a bigger map of the TRNC and where Kyrenia fits into that, and maybe even Europe and the world and where we are in comparison to other places. Where are we in terms of the ocean? Where are we in terms of access to other countries? Where are we politically? All those things can be relevant. And then obviously, is there any information you can find from newspapers, from articles, from the internet, from social media? The more reputable source, the better, I'd say. But any information about pollution, any information about housing developments, anything about the environment would be very, very useful to you as well. And you can use that in your investigation alongside your own research. Now, an exam question you might get is something like, name one piece of secondary data that could be used in the fieldwork and say why it was useful. Okay, so this exam is very much a reflective one, where you say what you did, and then you would comment on that and say, why was it good, why was it bad, why was it useful, why did you choose it? So you have to go into this topic and unit, basically saying and justifying everything you're doing. First things first though, you can't go on a field trip. We can't take you on a field trip. Doesn't matter what school you're at, unless it passes a risk assessment. Now, a risk assessment basically doesn't say, okay, it's perfectly safe to go, but a risk assessment addresses the hazards that might occur during that field trip, okay? Looking at the risk of what might happen and at what you can do to manage it. That can be about people, other people you might encounter, traffic, that can be about the weather, that can be about distance, that can be about equipment. All those things are very, very important in making sure an area is safe to go to and can be used as an effective fieldwork site. Okay, now in terms of a risk assessment example, you have to identify the risk. So, for example, it could be weather, it could be traffic, and then you have to give it a score. Now, I'm not saying that everywhere's perfect, but in the exam, again, you have to justify why you went somewhere, and saying why you didn't go somewhere else is also very important, okay? Just because you can't go to Istanbul doesn't mean that you couldn't consider it, but there's different problems with that. So, likelihood of it happening. If something's very likely to happen, it gets a 5 out of 5. If it's not very likely to happen, it gets a 0 out of 5. Being struck by lightning in sunny weather would be a 1 or a 0. It's not going to happen. But slipping over in the rain on a steep pavement absolutely could happen. That happens quite likely, especially if you're in the wrong footwear. So that'd be maybe a 4 or a 5. Then, on the flip side, you have to look at severity. So not how likely it is that it will happen, but if it does, how severe could the consequences be? So, use those same 2 examples again, for example. If you look at the struck by lightning one, that, if it does happen, is very severe, so that would probably get a 5. However, if you slip over, it's going to be more on a 1 and a 2. It's very unlikely that a slip will do anything more than maybe just hurt you in a minor way. So what you would do is you'd look at those 2 together, so 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, whatever it may be, and then you would times them together. So if, for example, we take the struck by lightning one, how likely is it? Not very likely, 1. How severe is it? 5. So you do 1 times 5 is 5. If you're looking at slipping and tripping, how likely? 4. How severe? 2. So 2 times 4 is 8. So the risk is 8 out of 25. Obviously the maximum being 5 times 5, if something is very likely and very severe. A risk assessment wouldn't be a risk assessment if you didn't consider how you reduce the likelihood and severity. So how do we reduce the chances of it happening, and how, if we can, reduce how severe it might be. So for example, rainy weather and getting hypothermia, how do we reduce that? Well, you take warm clothing. To avoid trips, you wear proper shoes. To manage being struck by lightning, maybe don't go on the field trip if it's really bad weather, or maybe find shelter during excessively heavy rainy periods. And then you have to also consider, what action do I take if it does happen? So maybe have some emergency phone numbers, maybe have some hospitals known to you where you can go, maybe wear, again, sensible stuff, but if it doesn't work, know what you can do in the event of that. So that is what a risk assessment is. Now, in terms of that, that's fine. We now have to work out what you're doing. So there's different sampling techniques. If I tell you to go into the field and just do whatever you want, you're not going to get anywhere with that. But also, if I tell you all you need to ask a person for an interview and you all change the same person, you all choose the same person, I should say, that's not going to work either. So there's 3 different types of sampling method. The first one is random. So random is literally a case of, okay, I'm going to count the amount of cars that pass me here over a space of 5 minutes. I'm going to choose this time and this site to do it, just randomly. Now that is a random point. You may choose to do that a random amount of times, maybe spin the wheel, whatever you may get. Now it's important that you evaluate these and say whether they're good or bad. So random is good because you can use random with a large sample size and it avoids bias. There's no way you've cheated. If it's random, it's random, so you haven't deliberately chosen sites that will definitely make your point true or false regardless. However, if it's random, you might be very unlucky and get data that isn't very representative at all. Maybe it might not help you in terms of maybe you're not allowed to go to some sites that are chosen randomly, and there can be practical constraints like time availability and certain areas of whether you're allowed to go there or not. The next way you can choose is systematic. So systematic is having a regular interval. Say, for example, you're going to record longshore drift at site 1, and then 10 meters at site 2, and then 10 meters at site 3, and then 10 meters at site 4, for example. Now, systematic is useful. It can be used with the others. It generates results which are more representative of the whole population, very flexible. You can use it in a lot of different ways, and it enables correlations. And in terms of disadvantages, systematic has disadvantages. You know, the proportions of the subsets must be known and accurate if it's to work properly, and it can also be hard to stratify questionnaires in particular. Some data might not be up to date or available. So you got random, systematic, and the last one I want to teach you is stratified. So stratified is like having a strategy. So it's more simple than, for example, random. It's more straightforward. A grid doesn't necessarily have to be used. Sampling just has to be done at equal intervals. Okay, so stratified is a good coverage of a study area and can be more easily achieved than using random. However, if you go in there with a strategy, you have to say that you actually have an element of bias there. You have chosen the sites you're going to be doing for a reason, to get data or to get some actual results. So that means it's a little bit more biased because not all the points of interest have an equal chance of being selected. So it's therefore might lead to a slightly perverse result. So you have to justify what you're doing. Don't forget about primary and secondary. Primary is data you collect yourself. Secondary is that which you use of other people. And you could do with knowing some advantages and disadvantages of that. So primary data is current, it's reliable, you know what you did, it covers your study area, it's focused on exactly what you want to look at, and it's collected in the same format you're interested in, but could have bias, does take more time than simply going on Google, can be expensive, can be maybe hard to see changes over a long period of time, especially if you're going on a one-off day in the school year. It might be unavailable on that certain day, then you haven't got it. And obviously if you're doing it yourself, you can't cover an entire country, so it's only a small scale. And the way I revise this is that secondary data is almost the opposite. So secondary's advantages is that you can do temporal changes, you can do it very quickly, you can look at a large area, you can include data that maybe you can't get yourself. However, some of it's more unreliable, maybe it's more out of date, maybe it's irrelevant to your study, maybe it's not exactly what you're looking for. And that is important to look at both sides, both types. The other two types that I want you to consider that can be mixed up is quantitative data and qualitative data. So quantity is data that has a factual element to it, a factual information, a number. It's objective, it's based on fact, it's not biased. Qualitative, so like quality, is the opposite. So it's data that is based on opinion. So it's not numbered, it's opinion based, it's subjective, based on opinion, and the ideal combo is having kind of two sides of the same coin. So then you have to consider the accuracy, so how close your results are to each other, maybe the precision, how close the measurements are to each other, and then once you consider all those things and how fair your results are and the risk assessment, then you have to consider how reliable your results are. Reliability is a measure of how dependably an observation is exactly when repeated. So it refers to the measuring procedure rather than the attribute itself. You have to look at how reliable your data is, and maybe you could do a pilot study as a practice to make that element. Now, in terms of your methods, one of them is a questionnaire. A questionnaire is a pre-planned form of questions, and your aim is to collect opinions from other people about a certain matter. So that means making some questions, looking at whether they're not too long, not too short, how much time you're going to have with each person, are they too personal? Do you ask for their age? Maybe not. Do you ask for their name? Is it public? Is it private? Do you have to ask them permission first? You should do. And that's how you basically do it. You do it in a polite way. Looking at good and bad things about questionnaires, ultimately it's some people's opinion, so it's not actually fact. It's qualitative data, but it is first-hand data that you've collected yourself, which is quite useful. Another element could be a pedestrian count. So over a certain amount of time, you need a timer for this. Also, it's important to look at what equipment you might need for some of these things. So a timer, your eyes over a certain amount of time, counting the number of people walking through an area. The best thing to do here is repeat it more often. The more often you do this, maybe 5 different times over an hour, it's more reliable, better data than if you do it once over an hour, because you never know, you might have got your data when there was nobody there by chance. If you do it randomly, or you might have chosen deliberately, systematically to do a people count, pedestrian count, next to a bus that ends its route. So that's an interesting idea to take forward. Maybe you look at land use surveys to see how the land is used in different areas. You could use maps, secondary data. You could do a field sketch, primary data, and these can show you what is happening at a different site or at a certain site at a particular time. A field sketch would show you what is happening at that exact moment. A map would be maybe what it looked like at a certain point in the past. Photographs, obviously they have an advantage and disadvantage. They are good because they're more reliable than field sketches, because I'm rubbish at art, for example, so it is good, it's quick, doesn't require much skill. However, maybe it's a little bit biased. You haven't got everything in one snapshot, you've only got a certain perspective, so it can also show irrelevant and too much information. But then it's important with a field sketch and a photograph to annotate them, make labels so you can remember where you are at the time. So consider equipment for different things, how you record things, whether it be through tally charts or tally graphs. For a land use survey, maybe tick what there is in certain areas. For a questionnaire, you have the questionnaires themselves. Maybe you have some scoring systems. And then you have to obviously make sure that you're laying this data out easily and in a presentable way so that you can use this data very easily in terms of converting it into bar graphs and pie charts. So ultimately you'll get exam questions. For example, explain one other primary data method you may have used. Describe 2 fieldwork techniques that you used, one quantitative, one qualitative. Identify the type of sampling method used. State one disadvantage of using sampling methods like random, for example. You have to justify that again. And that is everything before your field trip. Then you get to your field trip, then you come home with your results. How can you present this? So maybe you could use Excel to use a table. Maybe you could make a bar graph, a pie chart. Maybe you could use a word bank, a divided bar graph, a scatter graph. Maybe you could use an annotated photograph or a map with your annotated photographs and annotations extra on there as a sheet. Maybe it could be an EQI bar. Maybe the divided bar graph's better for things like number of pedestrians and traffic counts. You could also use proportional flow lines on a map for movement. Your field sketches, you can present them as you are. Again, maybe you can annotate them once you get back. The same thing with a map, the same thing with a photograph. Questionnaires, how can you do that? Maybe wordles, most common words that you heard about, maybe speech bubbles, maybe bar graphs again. And you might get asked a question about why you did this, or how you did it and why. So you'd say you did a bar graph, maybe why. What's an advantage, what's a disadvantage? It's also important to consider what could be better about the fieldwork at the time. So how could this be improved? Be self-reflective the entire time. Sorry. Once you present this data, you then have to interpret it and analyze it. So try and remember deal. Describe what you see, explain what you see. Are there any anomalies? That means data that doesn't quite match with the pattern, and then link it back to your research question / your 3 hypotheses. What does it actually answer? So I would write out each hypothesis, use your graphs, identify which graphs relate to which hypotheses, so which goes to number 1, which evidence you found goes to number 2, which one goes to number 3, and then describe, explain, and ultimately work out what your answers are. Are they true? Are they false? What can you use? So you've done different graphs, you have deal below them, and that is ultimately what you're looking at. And then the final hypothesis, so 1, 2, and 3, you look at that, does it answer it? Link back to the question, use what you've done, and then ultimately, that is where your conclusions and evaluation come in. So your conclusion is your overall hypothesis. Refer back to the original hypothesis. In this case, it's that one right at the first slide that I mentioned right at the start. A hypothesis is a statement that can be proven true or false, and your main aim is to investigate the relationship between land use and environmental quality in Kyrenia. So does it change the distance from the CBD? Does the environmental quality increase the distance from the CBD? Is there a relationship between distance from the CBD and pedestrian traffic count? And you'd look at those and think, right, overall, my data says yes or no. My data says actually true or false. Refer back to the hypothesis, use data, refer to theory, maybe some other people's readings of secondary data that you found, and state what you have learned from the investigation. Okay? I'm not in this video going to tell you the answers that you found. That is up to you to make sure you researched and prepared for you. But you would have, this hypothesis is true, this hypothesis was found to be true, this hypothesis was found to be false, for example. Okay? And then you conclude, overall, you investigated the relationship between land use and environmental quality. What did you find? Overall, we found in this area, in this area, and this area, This is because, Okay? And then consider the wider geographical significance and why they're interesting, how might they, again, be reflective, how might they be different to if you did this in the UK or maybe left kosher. So evaluating methods, look at the sampling method you used, the sample size, how much results have you got, how many times did you go on the field trip, how long were you there for, the timings, the method structures, the impacts of the day, the month, the timings, the weather conditions. Doesn't matter if you went to Kyrenia at 3 a.m. in the morning, would you get the same amount of people as if you went at 3 p.m. in the afternoon? And then decide why you went at a better time. Issues of the day, maybe there was a protest, maybe there was a blockade, maybe it was a public holiday, maybe that you had less equipment, maybe you forgot your equipment, maybe the equipment broke. Okay? Evaluation all the time, and extend that inquiry going forward. So that is a very very long/short summary of the urban fieldwork for you. Okay? Always be reflective. You could be asked one of two things in the exam throughout the loads of questions that are going to be in there. You could be asked to say what you did, and why you did it, or good and bad things about your investigation. If things went bad, that's not a problem. That's something to write about. And what the examiner could also do in some exams is they could bring up other investigations. Bruce and Sally did this experiment using this method. Evaluate why theirs is good or theirs is bad, or say why they should have done a risk assessment for their investigation. So it's about learning these key theories, applying it to your own fieldwork, and maybe applying it to other people's examples that they might bring up in the exam, like figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, whatever it may be. Okay? But I would revise your own fieldwork first and foremost, and if you do that, and what data you used and why, different types of data, different types of sampling, then you should be able to answer it for other people's examples too. Any questions, whack them in the comments. This hopefully has been a little bit helpful to you if you're in year 11 right now. If you're in year 10, this is either just happened, if you're watching this later, or is to come. And those of you in every other year, this is a fieldwork unit, a little insight into what fieldwork can be like. Take care, guys. I'll see you soon.